Hi, this is Yucca with our 5th Java guide and tutorial on Java development. Now in this guide and tutorial today, I'm going to introduce you to the structure and the layout of the typical Java class file, and it's very important before we try and move on with future tutorials that we understand that Java development, it entails that you develop around a certain set of standards as is done by the creators of the Java development kit, and we need to understand that there are a certain set of standards that we adhere to as developers, and that Java applications need to be structured and so forth. And before we can do any future tutorials, we need to introduce you to the Java Application Program Interface, or the API. Basically, what the Application Program Interface means to you as a developer is code which you can connect to with your code which you write as a developer of a Java class files or any Java code and so forth. Now, the Java Application Program Interface would be pretty useless if it wasn't documented and if it wasn't well structured so that you could locate the various classes and the various entities that you need as a developer and so forth. If you Google the Java API, you'll find eventually, if you click on the oracle.com link for the Java API, you'll find a whole set of HTML pages which document how the Java Application Program Interface is structured, laid out, and so forth, and it tells you basically everything that you need to know about the Java class files and so forth. Now, to understand how and why this is done, I'm going to introduce you to the packaging structure of a Java class file. Now, I've tried to bring in the concept, so if you picture yourself or if you bring about the concept that as a Java developer you can picture yourself as an author of an entire library of books, then it will be pretty easy to understand how the application program interface for Java comes about, and how you create your own directory structure, and eventually how you create your own documentation for your Java code, and the logic and the reasons behind why we do this as developers. So hypothetically speaking, you picture yourself as an author of an entire set or entire library of books, and you need to know where books belong, and you need to know where to locate them and so forth, and you need to know information about books and commenting and so forth. And we'll get to all of this with regards to the structure of class files and Java in these upcoming tutorials. So, I'm going to introduce you to the typical structure behind a Java class file. Now, in the previous example we did a very basic application. It was a console application. All this really served as a purpose for was to verify that your Java development kit is correctly installed, and just to introduce you into the fact that every Java application needs a starting off point, which is the main method. We'll get to methods in that in future tutorials, but the main purpose of this application is it's very basic. It doesn't do much apart from verifying that Java is installed for you if you wish to develop with it and so forth. Now, to bring meat to this tutorial, or substance to this tutorial, we're going to look at the structure of a typical Java class file. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create, in our previous guide we moved and switched to an integrated development environment, which does a lot of work for us and it simplifies development. And we still have our Hello YouTube class located in our source directory, but we're going to start creating packages. Now let's discuss what packages are. Packages are basically, if you picture yourself as an author of a book, it basically, you can think of it as a bookshelf, and we use packages to store and to bring structure around the Java class files, or hypothetically the books which we author as developers, so that not only we're able to easily locate them, but also other developers eventually are able to easily locate them, and eventually the documentation for these files will be structured around the packaging that we use for our Java class files and our applications, much like the application program interface, which you find if you Google Java API and you just go to the Oracle link. And here you can read all about Java, all about the code that is provided for you by the development kit, how to use it, and so forth. But obviously, to understand how to use this and how it's laid out in that, we need to introduce you to how you do this as a developer yourself. So, the first thing we do when we create packages is within our source directory here, and using an integrated development environment, we can choose an option to create a package. And all this implies is that we're going to create directories within our file system. Now, if I go to my example project here on my file system, you'll see that I have my source code directory with the hello youtube.java example from the previous guide, and I'm going to alter this now. I'm going to create a package here. When we create packages in development, we typically start off with a reverse domain name for the domain or for the business or system or the application that we're working on. As an example, I own the jarbar.org, and the standards that we adhere to, typically we use the reverse domain name to start off with our package, and we separate .com with a dot, and when we use a dot, a new directory is created within the first directory as is defined by the first word before the dot. In other words, I'm creating an org directory here, or I will be using the integrated development environment, and then the jarbar, which is my domain, and let's see what effects this has on my file system. So if I go to my file directory here, you'll notice all of a sudden I have a org directory, and within there I have the jarbar directory. Now you can see that the more you start developing and the more you start structuring your directories and so forth, that it brings structure to where you locate your Java class files and so forth. To build upon this, let's create a user.java class file which will represent users of our Java application and so forth. Now this is a very practical example. We're going to build on this in future tutorials and that, and to bring about the concept of packaging a little bit more in depth, to strengthen it, within our org.thejarbar package or directory, we are going to create an additional package, and typically users, we would put them in a database directory. So that's typically a user.java file typically will be used to represent data for a user of your system, and we can use a name like database, or we can choose a name like DB. And once we've done that, so now we have a directory of org, and within there we have a directory of the jarbar, and within there we have a directory of DB or database. We can go look on our file system here just to verify this with you. If we go into our source directory, we have org, the jarbar, and database. So now let's create the user.java class file, which we'll use to build upon for this example and future tutorials. Now we're going to go through a class file from top to bottom, and we're going to look at all the code in a class file, starting off with a user.java class file. We're going to create this in our integrated development environment. Remember, the name that you choose for the file eventually has to match the file or the class name. We'll get to that in future tutorials as well. But in this tutorial we're discussing packaging and package statements. Now the first line of every Java class file contains your package statement. Now once again, if I didn't mention it in the previous tutorials, a statement in Java is basically a line of code as follows, which terminates in a semicolon. In other words, what I'm highlighting for you is a statement, and this statement here, which has the package keyword, we'll get to keywords later and what they mean, but basically a keyword is a reserved Java word which has special meaning to the compiler, and basically the package keyword here tells us that this is a package statement. The package statement in turn tells us, or tells this Java user class file where it belongs on our file system, and it also tells eventually anyone who wishes to use this user class file in that we develop with and so forth, where to locate this user file in the directory structure and so forth. And this further extends to when we archive or when we compress our Java applications into .jar files and that, and we'll get to that in future tutorials. But anyway, this and the upcoming tutorials are to discuss class files more thoroughly and how they are structured, and that being from top to bottom, starting off with your package statement, and we'll build upon this in the next tutorial on that. And the core concept here is that as a developer there's a certain set of standards that you should adhere to, and there's a system behind development, and as a Java developer you're unable to proceed with Java development before you understand the Java application program interface, how it is structured, and more importantly that there is a standard which you adhere to as a Java developer. And we start off with by understanding packaging and so forth, which helps us understand the Java application program interface and so forth. And in the next guide I'll get into what this is, or this comment is. This tutorial is about packaging in Java. It's my 5th tutorial on Java development. Thank you for watching.